Okay, hello everyone. Okay, so the next program in chapter 5 is sales tax program refactoring. Okay, so programming exercise 6 in chapter 2 was the sales tax program. It was a sales tax program on a purchase. For that exercise, you were asked to write a program that calculates and displays the county and sales tax on a purchase. If you have already written that program, redesign it so the subtasks are in functions. If you have not already written that program, write it using functions. Okay, so we wrote this program and I have it, so we're going to modify it. I think that's what it wants us to do. It wants us to refactor that program. It wants us to take that program and the way it was and change it to functions, change the subtasks to functions. So I have it here. So actually, let's open it. And this is the first program I did in chapter 5. So let's go to Programming Challenges Python chapter 2. And it was sales tax. I have it here. Okay, so this is the program. What I'm going to do is, first of all, go ahead and copy this program. And I'll close it. So that's all the program. I'll copy it and I'll close it. And then I'll paste this one here, because this is the new program. This is what we're going to be working in. So this is chapter 5, question 2. All right, so this is the program we're doing in chapter 2. And again, it wants us to take this program and then basically change all the subtasks into functions and then run it. It shouldn't change anything. We're refactoring it. We are changing the individual tasks in this program to functions and then run it. So let's see what we have to do. All right, so this program was basically taking an amount from the user and then converting it to a float. It was calculating the state tax by calculating 5%, 0.05% of, 0.05, so basically that's 5%. 5% of the user amount of purchase that was just given to us. Calculating the county tax by calculating 0.025%, basically 0.025 of user amount, and then storing it as the county tax. And then it was calculating the total tax by adding the state tax and the county tax together. And the total sale was the total tax plus the user amount of purchase. And then it was printing the results. So now we're going to go ahead and create functions for this program. So first, let's start with the first one. The first thing is we can see that as a task. We can see that it's asking the user to enter the amount of purchase. So we can go ahead and break that into a function and call it ask user for the amount of purchase or something. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a function for that. So I'm going to define a function. Define a function. I'm going to go ahead and call it ask amount of purchase. Ask amount of purchase. And ask amount of purchase is going to be a function that's not going to receive any argument. So I'm not going to go ahead and define any parameter. But in the function, I want to go ahead and do exactly this. I'm going to go ahead and ask the user to enter the amount of purchase, convert it to a float, and then store it in a variable in the function called user amount of purchase. So you can see we're doing exactly the same thing. We're not changing anything. We are asking the user for an input, converting it to a float, storing it in user amount of purchase. And then when we are done, we want to return it. Before that, we can see that I'm exceeding this line over here. This line is like a guideline to help me keep 80 characters on a line. It's like a Python standard to keep 80 characters on a line. So I'm going to go ahead and follow that standard and keep 80 characters in a line. So because I'm exceeding this line, I want to break it into two. To break it, I'm going to go ahead and break it somewhere here. I'm going to close the string, concatenate it with the beginning of the next string, and then now I can break it here. Before you break any line in Python, you have to type in the backslash. So I'm going to do that and type in and hit enter. So now I've basically broken this line into two lines. Still the same thing, didn't change anything. I just broke it into two lines so I can follow the standard and be within the 80 characters in a line cap. or recommendation. Okay. Or Python standard. Okay, so now in this function we've asked for the users the amount of purchase. It's stored here in user amount of purchase. When we have that amount, let's go ahead and return it. Okay, once we're done getting that amount, let's go ahead and return user amount of purchase. Okay, so now we're done with one function here. We're done with it. Let's move on to the next function. We can see that the next task was calculating the state tax, right? So let's go ahead and create a function that's going to calculate the state tax, right? So I'm going to define a function, and I'm going to call it calculate state tax. Now, calculate state tax is going to need an argument. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and define a parameter. Now, the argument it's going to need is the user amount of purchase, because to calculate the state tax, it's 5% off. Okay, it's 5% off the user amount of purchase. So I need the user amount of purchase to calculate 5% of it. So I'm going to define a parameter for calculate state tax. And so basically, let me just put a space here so you don't get confused. This is what we are working on. This is a new one. We're just referring from the old programming chapter to question 6 and refactoring it by creating functions, putting it in function. That's what the question says. So it's going to need the user amount of purchase here. So I'm going to create a parameter, right, that is going to hold that user amount of purchase. So it doesn't have to be the same name, but it can also be, it can be the same name. You can use the same name, but it doesn't have to be. I will go ahead and I'll call it the same thing. In order not to confuse anyone, I will go ahead and change it a bit. I'll call it the same thing. It doesn't matter. So I'll call it user amount of purchase. So this function calculates state tax is going to take the user amount of purchase. But again, this value here can be different. You know what? Let me just change it just so it doesn't confuse anyone. But if you use it, it's not going to affect it. Okay, because I haven't put it in here, so I don't want to confuse you. But if I use it as a parameter name, actually I can use the same thing here. It's fine. It's fine. It's not going to confuse anyone because that's actually the value we're going to be calculating 5% off. So it's fine. But when you are calling this function and you're passing in an argument, let's say an argument user amount of purchase, okay, with the user amount of purchase stored in it. Let's say you had a variable outside of this function that had a user amount of purchase stored in there. If you call this function and you pass in the same variable user amount of purchase, although this function is defined with the user amount of purchase parameter, same name, it's not going to affect it. But we haven't gotten there yet, so don't get confused. Just know that what we're doing right now is fine. We are defining a parameter named or called user amount of purchase. So this function is going to need that amount. And in the function, we want to just go ahead and do the same thing. We want to go ahead and hold on. I need to colon. We want to go ahead and calculate the state tax. So I'm going to create a variable in the calculate state tax function, and I'm going to calculate 5% of the user amount of purchase that was given or that was passed as an argument into this function, or that's going to be passed as an argument into this function. Store it in the state tax, and once you have the state tax, go ahead and return the state tax. Oops. And then we're done with the calculate state tax function. The next thing we're going to do is we are calculating the county tax. So I'm going to go ahead and it's basically going to be the same as this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it. Change the name to calculate county tax. It's going to take the user amount of purchase because again we are calculating 0.025 off user amount of purchase, which is 2.5%. It looks like 2.5%. It looks like 2.5%. Yep. And we are basically using this calculation to calculate the county tax. So it's going to need the user amount of purchase over here, so we can calculate 2.5% of it. And then it's going to, so basically I'm going to copy this line to replace what's here. So it's going to calculate 2.5% of the user amount of purchase, store it in county tax, and when it's done, we want to go ahead and return county tax. So basically, this function is also done. So now we have three subtasks created in functions. Okay, so county tax can go now because we're done with it. The next thing we are supposed to calculate is total tax. Now, total tax is going to be equal to state tax plus county tax. So let's go ahead and define a function and call it calculate total tax. And total tax is going to accept some argument, so I'm going to define some parameters here. And the argument it's going to need is, the argument it's going to need is, in this case, to calculate the total tax, you need the state tax and then the county tax, so you can add them together. So I'm going to specify the parameters as state tax. It's going to need a state tax, and it's also going to need a county tax. Now, these are just the parameter names for this function. Okay, any value can replace this. Any correct tax amount can replace the state tax and county tax. It could be stored in variables with the same name. It doesn't matter. Or it could be stored, or the values could be stored in variables with different names passed in. It doesn't matter. Okay, so calculate total tax is going to need the state tax and the county tax, and once it has those, it's going to basically create a variable in this function called total tax, and then add the state tax that was given to the county tax that was given. Okay, store it in total tax, and once it has total tax, go ahead and return total tax. Okay, so now we're done with total tax. Now the last thing we have to do is basically calculate total sale. So let's go ahead and define a function for that as well. So define calculate total sale. Now, total sale is user amount of purchase plus total tax. So to calculate the total sale as a function, it's going to need as argument the user amount of purchase plus the total tax, right? So this function is going to need the user amount of purchase. Now again, these names are just variable parameter names. You can change the names to whatever you like. All it is just a placeholder to hold something to be used in this function, and that's it. So it doesn't matter. You can give it any name. If you have a variable outside of this function called user amount of purchase, and it's holding the user amount of purchase, it doesn't matter they have the same name. You can still pass in that variable with the same name into this parentheses as an argument to the calculate total sale function, and it should still work. It wouldn't complain. This name here is just a name to identify the parameter name. The argument name, if it's a variable with the user amount of purchase, can be the same as the parameter name. It doesn't matter. Okay, this user amount of purchase variable or parameter variable in this calculate total sale tax only works in this function. It doesn't see anything outside of this function. Okay, so in define calculate total sale, we need a user amount of purchase, and also we need as a parameter or as an argument, or we need to define a parameter total tax. And then when this function is called, we need as an argument the user amount of purchase and the total tax in order to calculate the total sale. So in the function, what we are going to do is basically, we need to colon here. What we're going to do is calculate the total sale. So we're going to create a total sale variable and use the user amount of purchase that was given to us here, and add the total tax that was given to us as in this function when it was called. Add it up, store it in total sale, and then return it. Okay, so now we're done. So now all we have to do is basically start calling the functions and using them. So let me go ahead and delete this print function. We can create a function for that as well. Right, we can go ahead and do that as well. But first, let's just figure out how this is going to work. Let's also go ahead and create a main method where we are going to basically call all these functions. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and define a main method. Main method is like a function that has your program in it. So basically it's called, in most programs it's called, is the very first function that's called when your program starts running. Over here we're going to go ahead and explicitly call it ourselves, but basically, you know, the way it works is the main function is a function that is going to be called when the program is the first function that's going to be called when the program starts. So if you wanted to call any other function apart from main, you call it in main. Main is like your main program or your main method, your main function. So it's good practice to do that. But if you call your functions outside of main here, it will still work. So you're fine. So I'm going to go ahead and define main here, and we're basically starting to test our functions and write our program in main. Main is just a function again. We have to call it for it to work. So right now we're just defining it and writing basically our program. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and ask the amount of purchase, right? So let's go ahead and ask the amount of purchase. Let's go ahead and call this function ask amount of purchase. Now ask amount of purchase is going to basically ask the user for the amount of purchase and then return, well, first of all, it's going to store the value in user amount of purchase and then return it. Now when it's returning that value, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called user amount of purchase. And whatever value this ask amount of purchase is returning is going to be stored in user amount of purchase. So we will have the user amount of purchase stored here. Now the next thing we wanted to do was calculate the state tax, right? And the state tax needed a user amount of purchase, which we have stored here. So let's go ahead and calculate the state tax, right? By calling the calculate state tax function. Now we know the calculate state tax function needs the user amount of purchase here. So we have the user amount of purchase also stored here. Okay. Again, so like I said, this name is just a parameter name in the function. This name is just a parameter name in the function. Calculate state tax. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm using the same name, a value stored in user amount of purchase here outside this function. It doesn't matter if I'm using the same name and passing it into this calculate state tax function. It doesn't matter. These two variables are different. They don't see each other. Okay, this is only seen in this function and this is only seen in the main function. They don't see each other. It doesn't matter if they're the same. This is just a value. This is going to be a value I'm going to pass in the calculate state tax function. That's going to fill this user amount of purchase slot or the parameter to be used in this function. That's all. All right, so user amount of purchase now is remember the calculate state tax is going to need a user amount of purchase. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in, because I have it here, I'm going to go ahead and pass in the user amount of purchase here. I'm just going to copy it and paste it here. And once we calculate the state tax, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called state tax. And state tax is going to basically hold what's being returned by the calculate state tax function and store it in state tax. The next thing we need to go ahead and do is calculate the county tax. It's going to be the same as this. So I'm going to copy this line. And I'm going to change this variable to, well, first of all, let's call the function calculate county tax. So that's what I'm doing here. Calculate the county tax. And the calculate county tax is going to need the user amount of purchase. We have it here, and that's why we've passed it here as user amount of purchase. Now what's going to return is going to be the county tax. So we need a variable called something like county tax to hold it. Right, so now we'll have the county tax, we have the state tax, we have the user amount of purchase stored in this variable. Now the next thing we have to calculate is going to be the total tax. Now the total tax needs the state tax and the county tax, which we have here. So we can use it. So now let's go ahead and call the calculate total tax function. So it's going to be calculate total tax function, okay, which is going to basically take two arguments, which is going to be the state tax, right, and then the county tax. Now the calculate total tax function is going to return the county tax, okay, by basically calculating this Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I said calculate county tax. We've already done that. The calculate total tax function, which is this one, it's going to take the state tax, county tax, and then add it up together, store it in total tax, and return it. So once it returns the total tax, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called total tax, and total tax is going to hold whatever is being returned by the calculate total tax function. So now we'll have the total tax stored in total tax, the total tax variable here. Once we have the total tax, now we want to go ahead and calculate the total sale, right? So I'm going to go ahead and call that function calculate total sale. And remember, the calculate total sale needs the user amount of purchase and the total tax. We have the user amount of purchase here, and we have the total tax. So we can go ahead and use them. So user amount of purchase, it needs the user amount of purchase. It also needs the total tax. And it's going to basically add them together. In the function, it's going to add them together. And it's going to store them in total sale. And it's going to return, actually, we didn't complete this. I meant to, but I don't know why. It's just return. It's supposed to be return total sale. After we finish calculating the total sale, it's supposed to return total sale. Okay, so once it returns total sale, we know that once we call that function, it's going to return total sale. We need a place to store that variable. So I'm going to create a variable called total sale and store whatever is being returned by the calculate total sale function.